Hello and welcome to Indus News live from Islamabad. I am Muneeb Hamid with the news of this hour. Let's begin with headlines first. "15 people have been killed and over 30 others injured in a car bomb attack in the eastern Afghan province of Nangarhar. Officials said the security forces killed the gunmen who tried to enter the compound of Ghani Khail district's governor after the blast. US President Donald Trump has been taken to a military hospital hours after he tested positive for COVID-19. The White House press secretary said Trump will work in a special suit at the hospital for the next few days as a precautionary measure. Meanwhile, India's COVID-19 death toll has topped 100,000, while the infections tally climbed to 6.47 million. In Pakistan, 8 people died from the virus overnight, taking the country's death toll to over 6,500. Globally, the coronavirus has claimed over 1 million deaths, infecting more than 34.4 million people. China has accused the United States of fabricating lies and trying to take the world back to the jungle age. In a statement, China's UN mission spokesperson said some US politicians are undermining multilateral cooperation with their statements. Meanwhile, the UN Population Fund said it regretted the accusations by the US. This comes after Washington accused Beijing and UN agencies of the murdering of millions of babies, girls through forced abortions. Early voting has begun in New Zealand's general election. Prime Minister and Labour Party leader Jacinda Ardern has cast her vote as she seeks a second term in the office. The Election Commission said voters can head to the advanced polling till the final election day on 17th of October. News coming in detail after a short break. Stay tuned. Welcome back. Now let's have the news in detail. 15 people have been killed in a car bomb attack in the eastern Afghan province of Nangarhar. More than 30 were injured. Officials said the security forces killed the gunmen who tried to enter the compound of Ghani Khail district's governor after the blast. The Nangarhar governor's spokesman has confirmed the casualties. A member of the provincial council said at least 8 of those killed in the attack are civilians. Now, 8 media organizations have slammed the continuous vilification of journalists in Indian-occupied Jammu and Kashmir. In a joint statement, the organization said media in the territory has paid a heavy price to stay neutral and objective about politics and facts. The statement said for decades it has been reporting impartially on the atrocities in the Srinagar city of the occupied valley. It said the organizations regret the propaganda aimed at bringing a bad name to Kashmiri media. The media body said such vilification serves the interest of people behind these shameful acts, but it eventually hurts Kashmir. It added Kashmir media stands united to defeat the ill designs of such elements. The occupied valley has been under New Delhi's crushing curfew and communications blackout since August 5th last year. Now, in Pakistan, security forces have killed 2 terrorists and apprehended another in an intelligence-based operation in Khyber Pakhtunkhwa province. In a statement, the military's media wing said the terrorists were involved in the killing of civilians. It said the terrorists were also involved in attacks on security and other anti-state activities. Earlier this week, 2 soldiers were martyred in an exchange of fire with terrorists in North Waziristan. Still in Pakistan, where 8 people have lost their lives to COVID-19 over the past 24 hours, raising the death toll to 6,507. The Health Ministry says over 500 more tested positive overnight. It said there are 8,884 total active cases in the country. The ministry said out of over 313,000 detected cases, more than 298,000 have recovered so far. It said over 137,000 cases have been detected in the Eastern Province, while over 99,000 have been reported in Punjab so far. The National Command and Operations Centre said 735 hospitals are providing facilities to 717 patients admitted across the country. Now, US President Donald Trump has been taken to a military hospital hours after he tested positive for COVID-19. Globally, the coronavirus has claimed over 1 million deaths, infecting more than 34.4 million people. More details in this report.
Even after almost a year, the coronavirus is far from over, not sparing even high profiles. Global shares and the oil market have been struck after the news of US President testing positive. The White House press secretary said President Donald Trump will work in a special suit at the hospital for the next few days as a precautionary measure. News has sent a shudder across the country, drawing sympathies from the citizens.
It's very sad, but we keep them in prayer and that they'll recover. I'm sure they're in good medical care, and he'll be back and hopefully for the next debate. And I love our president. I think we need him back in office for the second term.
Meanwhile, the situation in Europe continues to deteriorate. The French authorities have warned that Paris can be put on maximum alert, while Spain is extending drastic restrictions across its capital, Madrid. Poland as well as the UAE have reported the highest number of infections in one day since the pandemic began. The World Health Organization has urged to strengthen the responsive measures against the pandemic.
We urge every single leader to strengthen their response, put targeted measures in place that we know can suppress the spread, ensure that health systems and workers are protected, and saves lives.
Over in Asia, India's COVID-19 death toll has topped 100,000, but the infections tally climbed to 6.47 million, while South Korea's new infections stayed below 100 for the third straight day. But health authorities remain on alert over a potential rebound in infections.
Now, moving on, China has accused the United States of fabricating lies and trying to take the world back to the jungle age. This comes after Washington accused Beijing and UN agencies of murdering millions of baby girls through forced abortions. In a statement, China's UN mission spokesperson said some US politicians are undermining multilateral cooperation with their statements. The spokesperson said the US is becoming the biggest destroyer of the existing international order. Meanwhile, the UN Population Fund said it regretted the accusations by the United States. Talking to media, UNFPA Executive Director Natalia Kanem said coercion of women is against the UN practice and policy. She said the UN has called on the US to review its programs in China, but Washington has been declining the calls for the past 4 years. Now, Iran has called on the international community to mount pressure on Israel to destroy its nuclear arsenal. In his address at the UN General Assembly, Foreign Minister Javad Zarif said Israel should promptly accede to the Nuclear Non-Proliferation Treaty. Zarif said Israel has been deceiving the world for decades about its clandestine development of nuclear weapons. He said Israel should be compelled to submit to the most intrusive inspection regime. Zarif also criticized the United States, calling it world's only perpetrator of a nuclear attack and giving blind support to the only possessor of the nuclear arsenal in the Middle East. The 75th UN plenary meeting was attended by nearly 100 foreign ministers to commemorate the International Day for the Total Elimination of Nuclear Weapons. Meanwhile, Iran and Syria have discussed bilateral ties and prospects of the normalization ties between some Arab countries and Israel. In a meeting, Iran's envoy to Russia, Qasem Jalali, and his Syrian counterpart, Riyad Haddad, condemned the deals, calling them a great betrayal. Iran state media quotes Haddad saying that Syria strongly opposes the process of normalization. It said the two envoys also discussed developments in Syria, the Astana trend, and Western sanctions against the country. In the meeting, both envoys stressed the need for strengthening mutual cooperation, with Jalali reaffirming Iran's support to Syria in all fields. Now, Palestine says expanding Jewish settlements is part of Israel's plan to implement the so-called US deal of the century. In a statement, the Foreign Ministry said Israel is building 5,400 new units in the settlements in the West Bank. Condemning the settlements, the ministry said Tel Aviv is planning to annex large parts of the West Bank. It said this reflects the systematic American and Israeli violations of international law and resolutions. The ministry said this Israeli action disproves this claim of halting settlements plans amid normalization spree with the Arab states. Now, the US says European countries have a fundamental role in supporting the Middle East peace process after the signing of the Abraham Accord. In an interview, Secretary of State Mike Pompeo said he believes European Union leaders have a strategic role in rejecting Iran. He said Iran remains the greatest force of the destabilization in the Middle East. The Secretary of State said he hopes Palestinians will join the US in holding serious talks with Israel. Meanwhile, Pompeo has tested negative for COVID-19 and he says he will proceed with his trip to Asia. Now, the Armenian Defense Ministry says severe battles are continuing with Azerbaijan in the northern and southern Nagorno-Karabakh region. Armenia's information center said one person was killed and 4 others wounded in a missile attack by the Azeri forces on the city of Stepanakert. While the Defense Ministry said it shot down 3 aircraft of the Azeri Air Force in the disputed region. However, Azeri Defense Ministry has denied Armenia's claims. It said Azeri drones continue to destroy military equipment of the Armenian forces. Earlier, Turkey said Armenia must withdraw its forces from occupied Azerbaijani territories if it wants Baku to agree to a ceasefire. Now, moving on, Sudan's power-sharing government and several rebel groups are set to meet today to formalize a peace agreement. South Sudanese chief mediator Tut Gatluak says the goal is to sign deals with all armed groups to resolve decades of conflict. In an interview, Gatluak said the parties will sign their final agreements after the 3 major groups sealed a preliminary deal in August. He said the mediators will continue engaging with the other holdout groups of General Al-Hilu and Al-Nur to reach an agreement. Gatluak said leaders from Kenya, Ethiopia, Chad, Egypt and Saudi Arabia will also attend the event. Sudan's new power-sharing civilian and military leaders say ending conflicts is a top priority to help bring democracy and peace back to Sudan. U.S. National Security Advisor Robert O'Brien says Russia has agreed not to interfere in the November presidential election in the United States. In a tweet, O'Brien says he has held a constructive dialogue with Russian Security Council Secretary Nikolai Patrushev in Geneva. O'Brien said they also discussed a number of bilateral issues of mutual interest. He said arms control, the Armenia Azerbaijan conflict, Syria and Afghanistan were on the agenda. O'Brien said while they have differences, he is optimistic two sides can make progress in key areas that will benefit the American and Russian people. Meanwhile, a Russian spokesperson said both sides confirmed the absence of intention to meddle in each other's internal affairs, including elections. He said the talks took place in order to normalize bilateral relations and strengthening of the international security. Meanwhile, early voting has begun in New Zealand's general election. Prime Minister and Labour Party leader Jacinda Ardern has cast her vote as she seeks a second term in the office. The Election Commission said voters can head to the advanced polling till the final election day on October 17. About 450 advanced polling stations have been opened across the country. The Commission said advanced voting has become more popular as it accounted for 47% of all votes in 2017 and hopes to reach at least 60% this year. New Zealanders are also voting on 2 other issues of legalizing recreational cannabis and euthanasia. Ardern's Labour Party, governing in a coalition with the Greens, faces the Conservative National Party in the pandemic-dominated campaign. More news coming up after a short break. Stay tuned. Welcome back. Now moving on with the news stories. The United States has slapped sanctions on 8 Belarusian officials, including Interior Minister Yuri Karayev. The move comes after the EU blacklisted 40 officials accused of rigging August presidential elections in Belarus. In a statement, U.S. Treasury Secretary Steven Mnuchin said Belarusians' democratic rights have been met with violence from officials. He said the U.S. and its partners stand united in imposing costs on those who have undermined Belarusian democracy for years. Earlier announcing the sanctions, European Union Council President Charles Michel said President Alexander Lukashenko is not on the current list. But Michel said the bloc will continue to follow the situation and can make changes to the list. Responding, Belarus has announced retaliatory sanctions against the European Union. The Foreign Ministry said Minsk believes in dialogue but is determined to respond to unfriendly actions. Meanwhile, European Commission President Ursula von der Leyen has warned the Brexit trade talks are running out of time. Talking to reporters in Brussels, Leyen said the United Kingdom and the European Union have made progress in many fields, but the most difficult ones are still open. She said the two sides should intensify the negotiations. However, British Prime Minister Boris Johnson insists it is up to the European Union whether the two sides reach a trade agreement. He said the bloc should hand Britain a similar deal like the one it did with Canada.
Well, I hope that we'll get a deal. It's up to our friends. There we are. They've done a deal with Canada, a long way away, the kind that we want. Why shouldn't they do it with us? We're so near. We've been members for 45 years. Like, it seems it's all there. It's just up to them.
Well, Johnson and Leyen will virtually meet today to hammer out terms for the negotiations after both sides gave concessions on fishing and red tape. Now, in France, Muslim activists have accused President Emmanuel Macron of trying to repress Islam in the country. The rebuke comes after Macron announced plans for tougher laws to tackle what he called Islamist separatism. In a speech, Macron said an estimated 6 million Muslims were in danger of forming a counter-society. The president said no concessions will be made in a new drive to push religion out of education in France. Wearing the hijab is already banned in French schools and for public servants at their workplaces. Slamming the president, a French activist said Macron's speech emboldened the far right and threatened the lives of Muslim students. While academic Rem Sarah alone said Macron failed to mention white supremacy, even though France has exported racist ideologies in the past. Italy's far-right leader Matteo Salvini has appeared in the court for illegally detaining more than 100 migrants at sea in 2019. Judge Nunzio Sarpietro is presiding over the closed-door hearing. Prosecutors in the Sicilian city of Catania accused Salvini of abusing his powers as a then interior minister. Salvini had ordered 131 rescued migrants to remain on a ship for 6 days until other states decided to take them. It will be up to the preliminary hearing judge to decide if the case is strong enough for the trial to proceed. Salvini says his former government supported him in his decision to deny the landing of migrants in Italy. If found guilty, Salvini can be sentenced with 15 years in jail as well as barred from holding a political office in the future. Hundreds of Mexicans took to the streets to mark the 52nd anniversary of the Tlatelolco Square massacre. In the 1968, security forces stormed a student protest, killing at least 30 people, while activists claim 300 were killed. Heavily armed police were present at the protest site to quell any violence. Demonstrators threw rocks at the police as they blamed state negligence for the 1968 massacre and lack of justice. Protesters also spoke against the feared massacre of 43 students in 2014, saying little has changed in Mexico over the decades.
Don't let it be what happened in 1968 massacre and everything that has happened since. I believe that repression still happens, that is repression by the state. Rather than serving the people, it just looks after its own interests.
Meanwhile, in Chile, hundreds took to the streets of Santiago against President Sebastián Piñera's government. Riot police fired tear gas and water cannon to disperse stones, throwing demonstrators. Protesters demand the approval of the drafting of a new Magna Carta in the referendum that will take place on the 25th of October. Tensions in the country grow 2 weeks before the anniversary of a social outbreak which began on the 18th of October last year. The mass demonstrations saw thousands killed, injured and arrested, with billions of dollars worth of damage and losses to businesses. Now, Paraguay has declared a national emergency for 90 days as wildfires burned vast swathes of the Chaco forest, which is home to many indigenous tribes. The National Emergency Secretariat said this has detected over 5,000 fires in the 24 hours in Chaco City region. The National Emergency Secretariat chief called the region a breeding ground for forest fires with no rain expected and air temperatures soaring. Authorities said 2 firefighting aircraft have arrived in the country and will douse the most heavily impacted regions. They said all the fires that have been generated are controlled, but they have not won the battle yet. Paraguay's Directorate of Meteorology said it does not expect rainfall until 7th of October. Meanwhile, in the U.S. state of California, fire crews have adopted a defensive stand and are battling nearly 2 dozens of wildfires burning into the foothills of Napa Valley. The National Weather Service has forecasted a return of high winds and hot weather over the next 2 days, sparking fears of uncontrolled fires. The emergency officials said more than 2,500 firefighters are battling the grass fire that broke out on Sunday. They said the blaze has destroyed 248 homes and other structures, with 52,000 residents asked to evacuate. The officials said only about 5% of the grass fire has been contained so far. The 2025 season in the U.S. has so far killed 30 people in California since August 15, while 10 have died in Oregon and Washington. A week-long holiday in China is being full of celebrations across the country. Authorities say a total of 108 million domestic tourist trips have been recorded so far, with tourism revenue reaching 76.5 billion yuan. What festivities made Chinese travel in this report?
Celebration vibes are full on in China's holidays that started with the National Day and include the Mid-Autumn Festival. Light shows, carnivals, food festivals and group weddings, every event has been spectacular. Group weddings for some 300 couples were held simultaneously in 7 places in northwest China's Shaanxi province. Couples holding the national flags mixed National Day celebrations into the ceremonies.
As we were occupied with our work previously, we did not have a wedding after we obtained our wedding certificates. So this wedding today also realized a dream of mine. I think this is a quite memorable day.
In the coastal city of Weihai in East China's Shandong province, a fresh oyster festival was put up, which attracted foodies and tourists to feast on. In another food festival, villagers gathered to have noodle together, as noodle symbolizes longevity in the Chinese culture. Over in Wuhan, Chinese cultural items including paper cuts, clay sculpture, and oiled paper umbrella are being offered to tourists.
Wuhan's epidemic situation is now under control, and the city will open all its scenic spots to tourists for free as a gratitude to the people's support in our fight against the epidemic. As an inheritor of intangible cultural heritage, I hope to make my part of contribution.
Other than delicacies, sightseeing is being popular too. The second longest river in China, the Yellow River, is one of the places that has drawn a huge number of tourists.
Now let's have a look at the weather updates across the globe. Well, that is all for now. For the latest updates, you can follow us on social media at indus.news. Take care.